When most people think of American plantation slavery, they think sweltering heat, enormous fields of enslaved blacks, and plantation mansions. But when was the last time you thought of another form of American slavery? Urban slavery. Have you ever encountered the story of an enslaved black man who was provided with his own dwelling? Or perhaps one who contributed to groundbreaking scientific endeavors? Christian David, also known as Davy, an enslaved black man in North Carolina, led a remarkably intriguing life that challenges common perceptions of slavery in the southern United States.
For the most part, an enslaved individual's life and history was not really well recorded in the archives. So rarely did they have last names. If they had last names, that was usually an indication that they had been baptized and that they had become a member of the Moravian Church.
David lived in his own dwelling and may have helped with groundbreaking botanical and mycological studies while being a pillar in the enslaved community and congregation of the time. Christian David, born around 1780 in the Bethabara area, began his enslavement as a distiller in the Bethabara distillery for the relatively poor James Barham. During his early life, David would help at the distillery and with other duties for Barham, as many enslavers would rent those enslaved out to others. In 1805, Barham owed more than $700 in debts and was compelled to sell David, who at the time was roughly 25 years of age, to the Unity administration of the Wachovia Tract for $400. After the Moravian Church bought David, his exact location was unknown until the year 1817. During this 12-year period, it is speculated that David either continued to work in the distillery or was sent to the Unity plantation, most accurately called the Negro Quarters. In 1817, in Salem Plantation's inventory documents, David's name was found along with other enslaved individuals. David's value was noted in this ledger as $236.77. We know that David worked alongside 9 other enslaved individuals who were frequently rented out for labor. One can only imagine the grueling hours David might have worked in the North Carolina heat. Daniel Welfare's Salem from Southeast helps depict what the environment might have looked like for David. The overseer of the plantation's house is pictured on the right, where the white and black horses graze. From our research, we suspect that David plowed away on a tiller, or weeded a garden, or carried materials around. He would have seen a similar landscape. But in 1821, David was finally taken away from the plantation and placed in the home of the Unity administrator and mycologist, Ludwig David von Schweinitz. Ludwig David von Schweinitz, born in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, was a world-renowned mycologist and botanist, or a researcher in the study of plants and fungi. In November of 1812, von Schweinitz arrived in Salem to become the administrator of the Moravian Southern Province in America, following in his father's footsteps. His father was the first administrator of the entire Moravian Church in America. Von Schweinitz played a paramount role in then Moravian Salem as the administrator of the entire southern Moravian provinces, concurrently leaving an indelible mark through his mycological and botanical contributions, some of which are still discussed in contemporary scientific discourse. When Christian David was placed in the home of Unity administrator and mycologist Ludwig David von Schweinitz, it wasn't just any average placement. It put David at the heart of power for the entire region, where he likely played a part in scientific work that remains a topic of conversation today.
The town and the administration went to great lengths to limit the number of enslaved individuals living in Salem. And based on some of the comments that you see in the minutes of these governing bodies, you can see that there was great effort taken to limit the number of enslaved individuals or people of color, even free people of color, from being housed within the town limits. The majority of these people had dwellings or lived outside of the town limits on the administrative plantation.
Von Schweinitz spent a large portion of his time away as a clergyman, studying fungi and native plants, even surveying the entire Moravian Church's area's flora. He lived in the administrator's house, the fanciest house in Salem at the time, formerly occupied by Dr. Vierling, the town's first doctor. 9 years after von Schweinitz's arrival, David was sent to live with von Schweinitz in the administrator's house, a radical difference from norms of the time. After spending the majority of his life enduring the well-known, unfathomable horrors of traditional plantation slavery, David was moved to live in the administrator's house in either the first or second attic. This marked David's formal entry into urban slavery, a significant transition that defies conventional understandings of slavery in the South.
I have come across really no definition of any enslaved individual's actual life. For example, what their day-to-day life was like. For the most part, an enslaved individual's life and history was not really well recorded in the archives.
The extent of David's labor at this point largely had to do with the cultivation of the garden behind the house and the driving of a vehicle called a chair to transport residents around. He may have also helped with duties around the house. In a letter from von Schweinitz to Hufel about Brother Schultz, von Schweinitz claims that David was good, so willing, and so useful, and very compliant. Von Schweinitz also declared that he therefore wanted to advise Brother Schultz very seriously to keep this David in his service here. With his help, we have managed without the service of sisters, and it would hurt me immensely if the poor, loyal man could not stay in Salem after he has become so accustomed to it. He would feel very unhappy if he had to leave. I have also promised him to do my best for him. Von Schweinitz held a deep fondness for David and greatly appreciated his assistance in managing the administrator's household and garden.
Just by reading this small piece that I have here is one of immense gratitude. That there is so much that needs to be done, and this individual seems to do it without any complaints or and does a great job. He says we wouldn't be able to get by without his help.
David was stated as not suitable to work on the plantation. He was placed in the administrator's house to do some basic duties like gardening and running the chair. This may reveal insights about the importance of David to life at the administrator's house. Furthermore, with von Schweinitz's positive relation to the old man, it seems possible that David may have helped von Schweinitz with research. For instance, David could have been instrumental in conducting fieldwork or gathering samples. In 1822, David's relationship with the administrator's house, Theodore Schultz, was placed as the new administrator over the Wachovia tract. The entire time David lived with von Schweinitz, he lived within the house. For some time, Schultz took von Schweinitz's advice and kept David in the house. However, in 1835, sometime after the arrival of Brother Schultz, David was subjected to live out of the house in a much smaller building. Brother Schultz announced that he planned to build a small house on his lot for old Negro Davy. It can be speculated that Schultz found David useful, but the presence of Moravian society to separate themselves from interlacing with enslaved people was mounting. This was a truly fascinating case of enslavers deciding to build a dwelling for the person they enslaved held in captivity. The house that David lived in was quite small and made out of a heavy timber frame with brick nogging. This house is pictured right behind the administrator's house. David only lived here for 4 years before passing away. David's house might have been constructed in order to separate David rather than to benefit him. One thing missing from the construction of his home is the receipt for windows or a door, going against the building codes of 1788, which were designed to provide brotherly equality for everyone. Clearly, building codes may not have applied here. David was a very active member of his beloved African American congregation. It has been stated in church records that David clung to his congregation with his whole heart and showed patience and resignation to the will of the Lord in bearing his last illness. At the time of his death, David was recorded as saying he was ready and prepared to go as a poor but redeemed sinner. During the days he was a part of the church, David was appointed as a Saladiner, serving as a liaison between the black congregants and the white minister. In July of 1824, just 2 years after transitioning to urban slavery, David was among the first in the black congregation to receive the blessing of confirmation. This appointment held a profound significance as it filled a vital need for a liaison between the newly segregated congregations. Even though he served in this role, David was still buried in the segregated God's Acre Cemetery when he died in 1839. After 1816, black Moravians were entered in the segregated God's Acre, signaling a new era for slavery and the Moravian way of life.
Was there tension between religion and slavery? I would say no. The Moravians never, as far as I've come across, expressed a large amount of criticism about the institution of slavery. They accepted it as part of God's plan.
From his humble beginnings toiling in a distillery and on a plantation, Christian David's journey took a pivotal turn when he found himself in the esteemed household of Ludwig David von Schweinitz. David's role within the garden and transition to living in his own dwelling reverberates with significance, shedding light on the intricate dynamics of enslaved life in urban Moravian Salem. And even though he was forcibly enslaved, David's presence within the Moravian Church was truly impactful. He embodied the spirit of resilience and unity in the face of slavery. David's life is still largely unknown and untold. Ludwig David von Schweinitz's work is still cited and analyzed, but without mention of David and his help. It is reasonable to speculate that von Schweinitz, responsible for the extensive responsibility of an administrator, would have lacked the time to pursue research in mycology and botany without the assistance of enslaved labor, namely David. David's contributions emphasize the significance of enslaved labor to von Schweinitz's scholarly endeavors. Yet despite David's pivotal role, his absence from von Schweinitz's published work has obscured his life from common knowledge. Piece by piece, we desire to rectify this by shedding light on the hidden story of Christian David. Christian David's remarkably intriguing life not only challenges common perceptions of slavery, but also serves as a reminder of the countless other examples of enslaved individuals whose stories have been overshadowed by the histories of their oppressors and the potential contributions these people could have made in shaping our history.